The Ariane 9 space station hung like a tarnished ornament against the vast canvas of space, its ancient mining facilities extending outward like metal tentacles. The station was a marvel of engineering, part modern construction, part prehistoric civilization ruin, all repurposed to extract precious minerals from the asteroid belt surrounding it. Ariane 9 was also home to 3 distinct species, though home meant different things to each of them. Lila Arden stared at the fractured coolant pipe, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, sweat beading on her forehead despite the environmental controls in her maintenance suit. At 28, she had spent 5 years on this remote outpost, choosing isolation over the crowded refugee settlements back on Earth. The station's artificial gravity felt heavier today, or perhaps it was just the weight of loneliness pressing down on her shoulders. Sector 7 Beta stabilized, moving to Delta Junction. She reported into her comm unit, her voice echoing in the empty maintenance tunnel. Only static answered. Communication systems were notoriously unreliable in the lower levels. Lila pulled a wrench from her utility belt and began loosening the coupling on the damaged pipe. As she worked, her hand brushed against the hand-woven blue scarf tucked inside her jumpsuit, the last remnant of her homeland, a place now existing only in memory. The textile's intricate pattern had been passed down through generations of her family, surviving wars, displacement, and now, the cold vacuum of space. The social stratification on Ariane 9 was as rigid as the metal bulkheads that separated its sections. The Kryn dominated, tall, elegant beings with silvery skin and calculating minds who controlled the station's operations and profits. Humans like Lila were tolerated for their technical skills, relegated to support roles, their quarters cramped in the station's lower rings. And then there were the Saurians, reptilian predators brought aboard as mercenaries to protect shipments, their towering frames and natural armor making them ideal security forces. The Kryn kept them on a tight leash, using neural inhibitors to control their hunting instincts, deploying them only when necessary. The different species rarely mixed beyond what was required for work. Lila had learned to keep her head down, complete her maintenance tasks, and avoid unnecessary interactions, especially with the Saurians. Their predatory gaze always left her feeling like prey. The pipe finally gave way with a hiss, releasing a small cloud of coolant vapor. Lila quickly attached a temporary seal and was preparing to install the replacement section when her handheld scanner beeped urgently. A life sign was registering nearby, powerful but erratic. That was strange. No one was scheduled to be in this sector. Curiosity overrode caution. Lila followed the signal, moving deeper into the maintenance tunnels that wound through the station like arteries. The tunnels narrowed as she proceeded, forcing her to stoop. The beeping grew more insistent, leading her to an access junction where the station's old architecture merged with newer construction. She nearly tripped over him in the dim emergency lighting. A Saurian warrior lay sprawled across the metal grating, his massive frame barely fitting in the confined space. Dark green blood pooled beneath him, flowing from a gaping wound in his side. His armor was fractured, bearing the distinct marks of energy weapons. The neural inhibitor collar around his thick neck was damaged, its control lights dark. Lila's first instinct was to retreat. A wounded Saurian without inhibitor control was the most dangerous thing on the station. Their species was notorious for their hunting prowess, their minds hardwired for the kill. The smart move would be to report this and let Kryn security handle it. But something in the creature's labored breathing, the way his clawed hand clutched futilely at the wound, stirred something in Lila. She'd seen reports of asteroid pirates attacking supply shipments recently. This warrior had likely encountered them and somehow made it back to the station, only to collapse in these forgotten tunnels. The Saurian's eyes snapped open, vertical pupils dilating in the dim light, focusing on her with predatory intensity. A low growl emanated from his throat, but the sound died as pain overwhelmed him. He lacked the strength to attack, but instinct still drove him to appear threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you," Lila said, knowing he probably couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone might convey her intentions. She slowly reached for her medical kit, keeping her movements deliberate and calm. The Saurian watched her, his breathing ragged, muscles tensed despite his weakness. Lila extracted a scanner and cautiously moved it over his wound. The damage was severe: internal bleeding, tissue trauma, signs of an exotic toxin in the bloodstream. Without immediate treatment, he would die within hours. Station protocol was clear. Damaged Saurian assets were to be reported and disposed of. They were considered too dangerous to rehabilitate once their control systems failed. Lila hesitated, her finger hovering over the emergency comm button. Then she looked again at the wounded warrior. Behind the pain and predatory instinct in those reptilian eyes, she saw something else: intelligence, and perhaps fear. In that moment, Lila made a decision that would change everything. She reached inside her jumpsuit and pulled out her treasured blue scarf. With practiced movements, she folded it into a compression bandage and, after taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, pressed it against the Saurian's wound. The warrior's reaction was immediate, a sharp hiss and a clawed hand shooting up to grab her wrist. Lila froze, heart pounding, as those talons pressed against her skin, not yet breaking it. Their eyes locked. She didn't struggle, didn't pull away. Instead, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, let me help you." Something flickered in those alien eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or curiosity. The pressure on her wrist eased slightly, taking this as permission. Lila continued working, cleaning the wound as best she could with her limited supplies, applying antibacterial compounds, and finally securing her scarf tightly around the Saurian's torso as a bandage. "That should hold for now," she said, sitting back on her heels. "But you need more than I can do here." The Saurian studied her, head tilted slightly in a gesture that seemed almost contemplative. He made a series of clicking sounds deep in his throat, a language she couldn't understand. "I'll come back," Lila promised, gathering her tools. "Try to rest." She left him there, conflicting emotions churning inside her. She had just violated multiple station protocols, risked her job, maybe even her life, and yet, somehow, it felt like the only right choice. That night, Lila lay awake in her small quarters, replaying the encounter in her mind. She had submitted her maintenance report, carefully omitting any mention of the wounded Saurian. Instead, after her shift ended, she had secretly returned to the access junction with stolen medical supplies and ration packs. The warrior had still been there. His condition slightly improved, but still critical. He had watched her silently as she changed the bandage, her once beautiful scarf now stained dark with his blood, and left the supplies within his reach. No words had been exchanged, but something unspoken had passed between them. Over the next few days, Lila established a routine: complete her assigned maintenance tasks, steal what supplies she could, and visit the hidden Saurian during off hours. She learned to move through the station undetected, using her knowledge of the maintenance tunnels to avoid security cameras and patrols. The Saurian, whom she had started calling Raxos after the constellation visible from her home village, was recovering slowly. His natural regenerative abilities were remarkable, but the toxin in his system was inhibiting the healing process. Each day, Lila expected to find him gone, either dead or having moved on, but each day he remained, seemingly waiting for her return. On the 5th day, rumors began circulating through the station. A maintenance worker in Sector 11 claimed to have seen strange markings on the walls. Another reported missing medical supplies. Security patrols were increased, and Supervisor Mara Jin, Lila's direct superior and a strict adherent to Kryn regulations, called an emergency meeting. "We have reason to believe a rogue Saurian is hiding somewhere on the station," Mara announced, her silver skin reflecting the harsh overhead lights as she addressed the human maintenance crew. Command has confirmed one warrior is unaccounted for following a security incident with asteroid pirates. Its control collar is non-functional, making it extremely dangerous. Lila kept her expression neutral, heart hammering in her chest. The Kryn High Command has authorized termination protocols. Mara continued. Any sighting must be reported immediately. Do not attempt to engage. Later, in the relative privacy of the tool storage room, Jack, a fellow maintenance technician with kind eyes and a perpetual oil stain on his coveralls, cornered Lila. "You've been disappearing a lot lately," he said quietly, his voice pitched to avoid being overheard. "And you've been requisitioning medical supplies with my access code." Lila tensed, preparing a denial, but Jack held up a hand. "I don't care what you're doing," he said. "But whatever it is, be careful. The Kryn are serious about this hunt. They've brought in specialized trackers from the Central Fleet." Lila nodded gratefully, then hesitated. "Jack, what do you know about saurian physiology?" His eyebrows rose, but he answered without questioning her motives. "Not much more than anyone else. They're apex predators, evolved for hunting. Their metabolism runs hot, and they have redundant organ systems. Some say they were genetically modified centuries ago for combat. But that might just be rumor. What about toxins? How would they process something foreign in their bloodstream?" Jack scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Their liver equivalent is multi-lobed, highly efficient, but certain compounds can overwhelm it. Why?" "Just curious," Lila said. "Too quickly." The security briefing got me thinking. Jack studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Look, I don't know what you're involved in, but Dr. Alara in medical might have more information. She did a rotation on a mixed-species outpost before coming here. Just be discreet with this new lead." Lila made her way to the medical bay during its quietest hour. Dr. Alara Nemes was working alone, analyzing samples under a molecular scanner. She was one of the few humans with advanced education on the station, respected even by the Kryn for her expertise. "Engineer Arden," she greeted Lila, looking up from her work. "Routine checkup isn't scheduled for another month." "This is unofficial," Lila said, closing the door behind her. "I need information about saurian detoxification protocols." Dr. Alara's expression remained professional, but her eyes sharpened with interest. "That's highly specialized knowledge. May I ask why a maintenance engineer requires it?" Lila hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "I've been reviewing the security incident reports. The missing saurian was exposed to a neurotoxin during the pirate attack. I'm curious about survival probabilities." "Curiosity seems to be going around," Dr. Alara remarked dryly. "You're the second person to inquire about saurian physiology today." Lila's stomach tightened. "Who else?" "Supervisor Jin. She wanted access to saurian thermal signatures for the search teams." The doctor leaned back in her chair. Strangely, she seemed more interested in capture protocols than termination methods. This was unexpected. Mara Jin was known for her strict adherence to Kryn directives. Why would she be looking into capture options when the order was to terminate? "About the detoxification," Lila prompted, filing away this puzzle for later consideration. Dr. Alara sighed, then reached for her tablet. "Saurians have evolved to process a wide range of toxins. Many of their prey species developed chemical defenses against them. Their blood contains specialized binding proteins that isolate toxins until their multi-stage liver can process them." She pulled up a biochemical diagram and turned the screen toward Lila. "However, certain synthetic compounds, particularly those developed by the Kryn, are specifically designed to overwhelm this system. The pirates likely used Kryn weapons, which would explain the difficulty in recovery. Is there a treatment?" The doctor gave her a long, evaluating look. "Theoretically, A compound that enhances liver function while providing substitute binding proteins could accelerate detoxification. I've developed something similar for human exposure to station coolants. She turned to her supply cabinet, unlocked it with her thumbprint, and extracted a small vial of amber liquid. This would need significant modification for saurian physiology, but the basic principles should translate. She placed the vial on the counter between them. Of course, this is purely academic discussion. Any actual treatment of a rogue saurian would violate multiple station protocols. Lila stared at the vial, understanding the choice the doctor was offering. Of course, just academic. Engineer Arden, Dr. Alara said as Lila reached for the vial. Whatever you're involved in, remember that actions have consequences, not all of them bad. With the vial secured in her pocket, Lila made her way back to Raxos's hiding place. The increased security patrols forced her to take a circuitous route, adding almost an hour to her journey through the maintenance tunnels. When she finally arrived, she found Raxos sitting upright, his back against the wall. The improvement in his condition was noticeable. His scales had regained some of their luster, and his eyes tracked her movements with greater alertness. But the wound in his side was still angry and inflamed, leaking a foul-smelling discharge that told of infection fighting with healing. "I brought something that might help," Lila said, approaching slowly as had become their custom. To her surprise, Raxos responded with a series of clicks and growls that somehow seemed less random than before. He gestured to his side, then to her, in what appeared to be a primitive form of communication. "Yes, for the wound," Lila confirmed, kneeling beside him and preparing a syringe with Dr. Alara's compound. "This might hurt, but it should help your body fight the toxin." Raxos watched her prepare the injection, then deliberately extended his arm, presenting the softer scales at the inside of his elbow. The gesture was so unexpected, so trusting, that Lila paused. "You understand more than I thought," she murmured, finding a suitable vein and administering the medication. Raxos made a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the metal floor beneath them. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched the edge of the blood-stained scarf still wrapped around his torso. His clawed finger traced the pattern woven into the fabric, then gestured to Lila. "It's from my home," she explained, unsure how much he comprehended. "A place that doesn't exist anymore. The pattern tells the story of my family." She pointed to the geometric designs. "Each symbol represents a generation. This one was my grandmother, who taught me to repair things. This one is my mother, who taught me to be brave." Raxos listened, his head tilted, pupils expanding and contracting as if processing this information. Then, deliberately, he placed his massive hand over his chest and made a solemn clicking sound. "You're welcome," Lila responded, somehow understanding that he was expressing gratitude. Their moment of connection was shattered by the sudden blare of alarms throughout the station. Red emergency lights began pulsing in the corridor. "Alert! Security breach in Sector 7. All personnel return to designated safe zones. Repeat, security breach in Sector 7. Lila froze. Sector 7 was just 2 levels above their current position. The search parties must be getting close. "I have to go," she said urgently. "Stay hidden. I'll come back when I can." As she turned to leave, Raxos caught her wrist. His grip was gentle but insistent. With his other hand, he mimicked the action of typing on a keypad, then pointed to the access panel near the junction. "You want me to lock it?" Lila asked, understanding dawning. "To hide you better?" Raxos nodded, a human gesture he must have observed from her. Lila quickly moved to the access panel and entered her maintenance override codes, setting the junction to hazardous materials containment status, which would keep most security scans from penetrating the area. It was another violation to add to her growing list, but she no longer hesitated. "Stay safe," she whispered, before slipping away into the maze of tunnels. The next week brought increasing tension to Arian 9. The search for the rogue Saurian intensified, with Kryn enforcers brought in from other stations to assist. Thermal scanners were deployed throughout the maintenance levels, and random identity checks became common. Lila was forced to be more cautious in her visits to Raxos. Sometimes days passed before she could safely reach him, and she worried constantly about his condition. The compound from Dr. Alara seemed to be working when Lila finally managed to visit. She found his wound significantly improved, the infection receding. More surprising was his continued cognitive development. Raxos had begun arranging the supplies she brought into ordered patterns, clearly attempting to communicate through them. He could now mimic several human gestures and had even attempted to reproduce some of her words, though his vocal structure made clear speech impossible. "The Kryn always told us your kind were just instinct-driven killers," Lila said as she checked his healing wound. "But that's not true, is it? They just never bothered to understand you." Raxos made a series of clicks that had become his affirmative response. "Why are they so determined to find you?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. One missing Saurian shouldn't warrant this level of response. To her surprise, Raxos became agitated. He scratched at the floor grating, creating marks that Lila gradually realized were crude symbols. He pointed repeatedly at his damaged control collar, then drew what looked like a simplified version of the Kryn command insignia with a line struck through it. "The collar," Lila said slowly, trying to understand. "Something about the collar is important to them." Raxos nodded emphatically, then pointed to his head and made a sweeping gesture outward, mimicking an explosion or release. "The neural inhibitors don't just control you," Lila guessed, the implications dawning on her. "They suppress something, your intelligence, your true abilities." Another affirmative click. "And if one Saurian breaks free and others see it's possible..." The political ramifications were enormous. The Kryn maintained control of the station, and likely many others, through their supposedly natural superiority and the controlled use of Saurian strength. If the Saurians were revealed to be sentient beings, artificially suppressed rather than mindless predators, the entire power structure could collapse. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Lila quickly gathered her supplies, preparing to hide, but Raxos caught her arm and pointed to a narrow maintenance shaft she hadn't noticed before. He made a pushing motion, urging her to escape. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered fiercely. The footsteps grew louder. There was no time for argument. Raxos physically lifted her toward the shaft opening, left with no choice. Lila scrambled in, pulling the grate closed behind her. Through the slats, she could see Raxos positioning himself in the shadows, prepared to fight or flee. 3 figures appeared in the junction, 2 Kryn enforcers in full combat gear, and, between them, Supervisor Mara Jin. Lila bit back a gasp. Had Mara tracked her here? Life signs indicated activity in this sector, one enforcer reported, scanning the area. Something recently interfered with the monitoring systems. Mara Jin stepped forward, her silver features impassive. Expand the scan. The subject could be using the maintenance shafts to move between sectors. As the enforcers moved to different access panels, Mara remained in the center of the junction. Then, almost imperceptibly, her eyes flicked toward Raxos's hiding place, then to the shaft where Lila was concealed. For one heart-stopping moment, Lila was certain they had been discovered. But instead of raising the alarm, Mara reached into her pocket and deliberately dropped something on the floor. "Nothing on initial scans," she announced loudly. "Continue to the next sector. I'll complete the verification here and follow." The enforcers nodded and moved on. Mara waited until their footsteps faded, then spoke quietly, her back to both hiding places. "Engineer Arden, I know you're here. I've known about your activities for days. My report shows this section was cleared. It will remain cleared for exactly 12 hours before the next scheduled sweep." She paused, then added, The item I dropped contains access codes to the lower shuttle bay and navigation coordinates to an unmanned research outpost in the outer belt. Make good use of them. With that cryptic message, she turned and followed the enforcers, leaving behind a small data chip on the floor. When the junction was clear, Lila emerged from the shaft, trembling with adrenaline. Raxos appeared from his hiding place, looking equally confused by this turn of events. Why would she help us? Lila wondered aloud, picking up the data chip. She's always been a model Kryn subordinate. Raxos made a gesture toward his eyes, then to his wounded side, where Lila's scarf still served as a bandage. She saw something worth saving. Lila translated, the concept resonating with her own initial decision to help Raxos. Just like I did. They had little time to contemplate Mara's motivations. The data chip contained exactly what she had promised, access codes and coordinates, along with a brief message. Kryn High Command arriving tomorrow. Final sweep ordered. Termination protocols upgraded to maximum force. The situation had escalated beyond anything Lila had anticipated. She had imagined hiding Raxos until he recovered, perhaps helping him escape during a supply shipment. But with Kryn High Command coming personally to oversee the hunt, time had run out. We need to leave tonight, she told Raxos, already mentally calculating what supplies they would need and how to reach the shuttle bay undetected. Raxos tilted his head questioningly, pointing to her, then making a sweeping gesture that encompassed the station. Yes, both of us, Lila confirmed. I can't stay here now. They'll eventually trace the security overrides back to me. There was more to it than that, though she didn't fully articulate it even to herself. In the short time she had known Raxos, something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of the universe and her place in it. The rigid boundaries between species, the hierarchies she had accepted as natural law, all of it seemed increasingly artificial, designed to maintain power rather than reflect reality. That night, under the cover of a scheduled maintenance shutdown, Lila and Raxos began their journey to the lower shuttle bay. They moved through the darkened maintenance tunnels, avoiding main corridors and security checkpoints. Raxos's knowledge of patrol patterns proved invaluable, another indication that the Saurians were far more aware of their surroundings than the Kryn admitted. They had almost reached the shuttle bay when disaster struck. A station-wide alarm blared, followed by an announcement that chilled Lila's blood. Security alert. Unauthorized access detected in maintenance systems. All sections lockdown initiated. Kryn High Command vessel has initiated emergency docking procedures. The timing couldn't have been worse. The Kryn leadership had arrived early, and somehow their security systems had detected the intrusion into the shuttle bay access codes. We need to hurry, Lila urged, quickening her pace toward the bay entrance. But as they rounded the final corner, they found their path blocked by a full squadron of Kryn enforcers, their weapons trained on the corridor. At their center stood a tall figure in elaborate ceremonial armor, the distinctive regalia of the Kryn High Commander. Surrender the rogue asset, the commander ordered, his voice amplified through his helmet. Comply, and the human will be spared. Lila felt Raxos tense beside her, a low growl building in his chest, his claws extended, body shifting into a combat stance. She placed a restraining hand on his arm. There has to be another way, she whispered. We can't fight through all of them. Raxos looked down at her, his reptilian features softening in what she had come to recognize as his expression of concern. He made a series of clicking sounds, then touched the scarf at his side and placed his other hand over his heart. Before Lila could interpret this gesture, he pushed her behind him and stepped forward, arms raised in what appeared to be surrender. The Kryn enforcers advanced cautiously, weapons still raised. The High Commander approached, his silver features contemptuous as he examined Raxos. Fascinating, he said. Neural suppression completely disabled, yet cognitive functions clearly enhanced rather than deteriorated. The research division will be interested in dissection results. Lila stepped out from behind Raxos, anger overriding fear. He's not a specimen for your labs. He's a sentient being with rights. The commander's attention shifted to her, his expression hardening. Engineer Arden, you've committed multiple violations of station protocol, interfering with security operations, unauthorized medical procedures, attempted theft of station property. He's not property, Lila insisted. None of them are. You've been suppressing their intelligence, keeping them as slaves. We've been controlling dangerous predators, the commander countered. Creatures evolved to hunt and kill. Would you prefer we had exterminated them instead? Before Lila could respond, a new alarm sounded, different from the security alert, more urgent. Environmental alert. Containment breach detected in primary coolant system. Catastrophic failure imminent. All personnel evacuate to emergency shelters. Confusion spread through the enforcer ranks. The commander activated his comm unit. Report. Is this a malfunction? Whatever response he received clearly disturbed him. He signaled to his troops. Secure these two and proceed to command level. Engineering teams to coolant control. As several enforcers moved to detain them, the station shuddered violently. Emergency lights flickered, and the distant sound of rushing liquid echoed through the corridors. The coolant breach was real and spreading rapidly. In the moment of chaos, Raxos acted with lightning speed. He knocked aside the nearest enforcers, grabbed Lila, and sprinted not toward the shuttle bay but back into the maintenance tunnels. "What are you doing?" Lila shouted over the alarms. "The shuttle was our only way out." Raxos continued running, making sharp turns through the tunnel network, clearly following some plan of his own. They emerged into a section Lila didn't recognize, older architecture, with symbols etched into the walls that predated human or Kryn presence on the station. At the end of the corridor stood a massive circular door, its surface covered in intricate patterns similar to those on ancient artifacts occasionally recovered from the asteroids. Raxos approached a control panel beside it and, to Lila's astonishment, began entering a complex sequence of commands. "You know this place," she realized. "You know how to operate the original systems." Raxos nodded without pausing his work. The door began to iris open, revealing a chamber beyond that hummed with power. Inside was what appeared to be an ancient shuttle crafted by the same civilization that had built the original station. Smaller than modern vessels, but emanating an aura of advanced technology. "How is this still functioning?" Lila wondered, stepping into the chamber. "And how do you know about it?" Raxos made a gesture toward his head, then to the walls, suggesting some form of connection or knowledge transfer. There was no time for further explanations. The station's emergency systems were announcing imminent structural failure in multiple sectors. They boarded the ancient vessel, which activated at Raxos's touch. Controls illuminated with symbols matching those on the walls, and a low thrumming filled the air as dormant systems awakened. Lila watched in amazement as Raxos operated the unfamiliar technology with confident precision. The chamber's outer door opened to reveal space beyond, and the shuttle glided forward, emerging from a hidden dock on the station's underside just as secondary explosions began rippling through Area 9's lower sections. As they pulled away, Lila watched through the viewport as evacuation pods launched from the station's emergency bays. Among them, she spotted the distinctive markings of a Kryn command vessel, the High Commander and his entourage escaping the destruction. "Did you cause the coolant breach?" she asked Raxos, suddenly understanding. "As a diversion?" Raxos made a negative gesture, then pointed to the station's communications array. A moment later, a transmission came through on the shuttle's ancient but still functional receiver. The voice was familiar. Supervisor Mara Jin. "To all station personnel. Emergency evacuation procedures are in effect. Coolant system failure has been contained to non-residential sectors. Investigation indicates sabotage by unknown parties." There was a pause. Then Mara continued, her voice dropping to a more personal tone. "Engineer Arden, If you're receiving this, good luck. The research outpost coordinates remain valid. You'll find allies there. The transmission ended. Lila sat back, processing this revelation. Mara created the diversion for us. But why take such a risk? Raxos had no answer, focusing instead on navigating their unusual craft away from the station and the evacuation vessels. When they were safely distant, he set a course matching the coordinates from Mara's data chip and engaged what appeared to be some form of faster-than-light drive that operated on principles unknown to current science. As the stars blurred around them, Lila finally had a moment to examine their situation. They were fugitives, escaped from a partially destroyed space station, in an ancient vessel they barely understood, heading toward an unmanned outpost with only Mara's vague promise of allies. Yet somehow, she felt more at peace than she had in years. She looked at Raxos, who was examining the shuttle's systems with evident fascination. "We're going to need to find a way to communicate better," she said. "There's so much I want to ask you." Raxos turned from the controls and approached her. With deliberate movements, he unwrapped the blue scarf from around his now healed side. The fabric was stained and torn, but the pattern remained visible. He held it carefully, almost reverently, then slowly extended it toward Lila. She shook her head. "Keep it. It saved your life. And now, well, it's part of your story, too." Raxos considered this, then carefully folded the scarf and secured it at his waist like a sash of honor. He then knelt before her, one clawed hand pressed to his chest in a gesture of solemn commitment. Lila understood. Without neural inhibitors, without the artificial boundaries created by the Kryn. Raxos had chosen his own path, and that path included protecting the human who had shown him compassion when others would have destroyed him. "We're going to change things, aren't we?" she said quietly. "For humans, for Saurians, maybe even for the Kryn eventually." Raxos rose and made an affirmative sound, gesturing toward the stars streaming past their viewport, a universe of possibilities opening before them. 3 months later, the research outpost had transformed from an abandoned scientific facility into a thriving community. True to Mara's word, they had found allies there, a mixed group of humans, Saurians, and even a few disillusioned Kryn who had recognized the injustice of the old system and sought something better. Word had spread through hidden channels, drawing others who dreamed of a different kind of society. The Saurians, freed from their neural inhibitors, revealed themselves to be not just intelligent but culturally sophisticated, with traditions and knowledge dating back to the original builders of Ariane 9. Lila had become a bridge between species, her engineering skills valued, but her capacity for compassion valued even more. She worked closely with Dr. Elara, who had arrived with the second wave of refugees, to develop technologies that enhanced communication between the different physiologies. Raxos remained by her side, her constant companion and protector. He had assumed leadership among the Saurians, but always deferred to the council they had established, representatives from all species making decisions together. On quiet evenings, when the work of building their new home slowed, Lila would often find Raxos on the observation deck, his massive frame silhouetted against the backdrop of stars, the blue scarf still worn proudly at his waist. He would be tracing the patterns woven into the fabric, as if reading the story it contained, not just of Lila's family now, but of their shared journey. Sometimes Jek would join them, bringing his latest mechanical innovation. Sometimes Mara Jin, who had narrowly escaped the Kryn's retribution and found her way to them, would sit quietly nearby, still adjusting to a world where her former superiors were not in control. On one such evening, as they watched a meteor shower illuminating the darkness, Raxos surprised Lila by speaking her name, his first fully formed human word, the product of months of effort to adapt his vocal structures. "Lila," he said, the sound rough but unmistakable. He touched the scarf, then placed his hand over his heart in the gesture that had become their shared symbol. I know, she replied, understanding what he couldn't yet say. Family. Around them, the outpost hummed with life, not just human or saurian or Kryn life, but something new, something that transcended the boundaries they had once thought unbreakable. In the distance, lights from approaching vessels signaled the arrival of more refugees, more builders for their growing community. The blue scarf, once a simple reminder of a lost home, had become something more, a symbol of the unexpected connections that could form across the stars, of courage rewarded with loyalty, of a single act of compassion that had changed not just 2 lives, but potentially the course of civilization itself. Raxos nodded, his expression solemn yet hopeful as he looked out at the expanding community below them, predator and protector, guardian and friend, family in all the ways that truly mattered. Home, he said, his second human word even clearer than the first, encompassing everything they had built together and everything still to come.